saying my permissions don't allow this, but it worked earlier. 1 second.
Are you just admitting all?
I'll admit all, it's just not letting me live feed. Yeah, I'll admit all now.
Oh, thank you.
Israel settlements in the
I could ask you all to please mute yourself. Please mute yourself as you come in.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
Clicked on it.
There should be a red line.
There was also new research which says that at least 1 in 14 Ukrainians.
Okay. Just waiting for people to come in from the waiting room there.
Are you?
Okay, don't forget to mute yourself as you come in. Okay. 1 or 2 more moments.
Stream's up. Ready when you are. Okay.
Thanks very much. Okay, well, people will continue to join us in the next few minutes, I think. So welcome everyone to this international online rally, Ukraine, How to Stop This War, organised by CND and the Stop the War Coalition. It's now 2 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands are dead, countless more injured, homes and infrastructure destroyed, and millions displaced. And of course, as we're very aware, the risk of nuclear war increased. The impact of the war has gone far beyond Ukraine. The production and distribution of crops, energy, and other essentials has been disrupted, causing hardship across continents. Militarization has spiraled, with huge amounts of weaponry shipped from the West to Ukraine. A culture of war and nationalism has been emboldened, and peace and anti-war protesters have been vilified in Russia, in Ukraine, and worldwide. We believe that this war must end, that the provocation of NATO expansion must cease, and that there must be a just and lasting negotiated settlement meeting the needs of all peoples. Before we start, I'd just like to say a few words about one of our advertised speakers, about Boris Kagarlitsky, the Russian anti-war campaigner. He agreed to speak, but has since been arrested in Russia and sentenced to 5 years in prison. If you want to know more about this, you can see Amnesty International's statement calling for his immediate release, and that has been published on CND's website. I want to pay tribute to his stance and to that of all those opposing the war, particularly within Russia and within Ukraine. I'm sure we all know that it takes real courage and principle. So, the discussion with our international panel will focus on what we can do to help end this war. So we're just waiting for a few of our speakers to join us. But I'm going to call, first of all, on Lindsey German to open the meeting. Welcome, Lindsey.
Thanks very much, Kate. And it's very good to see so many people here. And thanks very much for coming. I'd just like to echo, firstly, my solidarity with Boris Kagarlitsky. He's been a lifelong campaigner over a range of issues, and for him to be put in prison at this stage is an absolute outrage, and I think we should all send our solidarity. We're facing increasing difficulties here with protesting and with organising, but we all know that this is nothing compared to what people are facing in Russia, and indeed Yurii, who'll be speaking later from Ukraine. What I wanted to talk about today, we are exactly 2 years on from the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. As Kate has said, there have been hundreds of thousands have been killed. This is an absolutely brutal war on both sides. We've seen whole towns and villages destroyed. We've seen people made homeless, refugees, many people killed, both civilians and military, and also many people injured, terrible injuries, including many amputations on the Ukrainian side. We know that there is a big argument in Ukraine over conscription, that the loss of life is such that they're trying to get more and more people to join up, and people very understandably don't want to do this. We know there is an argument over the future of the war. And I think what is remarkable about the narrative that you get here in Britain is how little people talk about what is actually happening in Ukraine. And the truth of the matter is, despite all the people who say we're with Ukraine till victory, it will go on and on, the war will go on and on, that is not what is going to happen. Because what is going on at the moment is a very a bitter war in which Ukraine is being pushed back by Russia. It is a war where if you look at the kind of war it is, it reminds you of some of the warfare in the First World War. And to be honest, the response of the politicians to that is just like the politicians in the First World War, which is that we're going to keep going on till victory. There can be no surrender. We can't have any kind of settlement. And yet they know this war is not being won. We've seen the Ukrainian retreat from Avdiivka, the town that was destroyed only last week. We saw it in Bakhmut. And although Ukraine has done damage to the Russian fleet in the Black Sea, this is not going to be sufficient. If you look at the for example, the discrepancy in terms of the populations of Ukraine and Russia, the truth is that Russia has much more resources to draw on in terms of conscript soldiers and so on. So this is a war which is being kept going because in reality, it is a proxy war between NATO and Russia. And it is a war where NATO is spending huge amounts of money on arming Ukraine with all sorts of weaponry, aiding Ukraine in sending advisors to Ukraine. And this, we said this 2 years ago. We said we condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that we didn't believe that was justified. But we also said that there was no justification for this proxy war and that it would end badly. It would either end in this kind of situation that we're now seeing, where there is very heavy losses going on both sides, and the war is still continuing with all the privations that means for the people of Ukraine. Or we said it would escalate as a war involving other powers, escalating between nuclear powers on the one hand, Russia, and on the other hand, NATO, which of course has nuclear powers from the US, Britain, and France. So we said this would end badly, and we said that there needs to be a negotiated settlement. Now, what we now know is that there was a very serious attempt to have a negotiated settlement back in the spring of 2022. And we knew this was going on at the time, but it's been confirmed since then that actually these peace talks were scuppered by Boris Johnson in particular, because they felt that Russia wasn't doing as well as it thought it was going to be doing in the war, and they felt this was a chance to push Russia back even further and to make even more military gains against Russia. And therefore, Boris Johnson, there was this deal which would have guaranteed neutrality for Ukraine as long as it didn't join NATO, and NATO was the big red line which they'd known for decades. And Ukrainian membership of NATO was the red line which the West had known for for decades, and that there could be discussions about the disputed territories of Donetsk and Luhansk and of Crimea. Those things would have been the basis for some kind of settlement. They were completely dismissed by Boris Johnson, the man who said, let the bodies pile high, not about the Ukrainian people, but about ourselves during the COVID crisis. He has absolutely no concern for the people of Ukraine or for peace, and indeed Johnson is in Kiev today cheering on further warmongering. He's been joined by various political leaders, Ursula von der Leyen from the EU, but also Giorgia Meloni, the fascist prime minister of Italy, are all in Ukraine, beating the drum for war and hoping that it continues. Now, I think for us, there's the question of Ukraine itself and the argument that we don't want this war to escalate, and we don't want the killing of Ukrainian people. This war, if it's fought in coming years, it will be fought at the expense of the Ukrainian people to the last drop of Ukrainian blood, and that certainly isn't what we want to see. But we also have to see this in a wider context, because it's about the conflict between the United States in particular, US imperialism in particular, its very close ally in Britain, the special relationship, which means that Britain does whatever the United States says it should do over foreign policy. But of course, we now have a major war in Gaza, and the war in Gaza is such that we know 30,000 people have died. We know that among them are 12,000 children. We know that people are starving in Gaza, that every hospital has been bombed, that this is an absolutely brutal genocide in real time. And the potential of that also escalating is very, very great. The potential of it escalating throughout the Middle East. But of course, as with Ukraine, there's various alliances on different sides, and the possibility of this involving much greater war is already there. So I think we have to see this and link it up with the other questions. The arms race across the world has doubled the arms spending has doubled in the last 20 years. I think you have to see a very serious arms race going on at the moment across the major arms spenders of the world, and this is increasing dramatically. The increased attention to the Pacific and the threat of war there with China, and this, people fear the election of Donald Trump quite rightly next year, but the truth is that Biden's policy has also been to back Netanyahu, to talk tough over Taiwan, to continue to fund Ukraine. So we're in a very dangerous situation here, the danger of much, much greater wars and the different wars linking up between them. And it seems to me that the imperialists are determined to go to war despite the consequences. And I think the job of us here in Britain has to be to campaign against wars. Now, with Ukraine, it's much, much harder to do than it is over Palestine. That there's been a whole number of attempts by the government, by the military, by the politicians to make us accept that this is a war that has to continue, that has to go on. But it is not in the interest of people in this country. It's not in the interest of people in Ukraine or Russia, and it's not in the interest of people anywhere else in the world. And therefore, we have to look at a different way of talking about this. And one of the things I think we have to campaign on in Britain is the question of arms spending, that we now have well over 2% of GDP spent on arms. We have nearly half as much is spent on so-called defence every year as is spent on the total budget for education at all levels in this country. Now, that at the very least has to be a distortion of our priorities. And I think when we talk about security, which is always the reason that is given for spending all this money on arms, I think we have to say, what does security really mean? Does it mean safety from food shortages, Kate talked about in the introduction? Does it mean doing something about climate change? Does it mean ensuring that everybody has a reasonable home to live in? Does it mean that our children have a decent education for the future? Does it mean that we have a health service that works? All of these other areas are being underfunded, but defence spending is prioritised and is being enhanced as a result of the decisions of Boris Johnson's government. So the real problem here, and of course it's a bipartisan problem, because Keir Starmer not only backs the government policy over Israel and over Gaza, but is also very, very much committed to all the agenda of more military spending, of more aggression in different parts of the world, of these huge big ticket schemes, the aircraft carriers and so on. So we have the aircraft carriers without aircraft, or the aircraft carriers that can't get past the Isle of Wight because they've got a problem with their propellers, or any of those kind of things. The Labour Party and the Labour opposition is as committed to these kind of policies as much as the Tories. So here, I think the question of peace and anti-war campaigning is absolutely central. It means that we have to keep campaigning over Ukraine. We have to explain to people exactly what is going on there, and that actually nearly all wars end in negotiations, and this war too will end in negotiations. The real question is how many people have to die and have to suffer before that happens. So that, it seems, is very important. And of course, we do have to link it to the question of Palestine. When Putin cuts off water and electricity to the people of Ukraine in certain towns, it's denounced instantly as a war crime. When Netanyahu does the same and much, much worse, as we've seen in Gaza, this is justified, as it was by Keir Starmer when it happened back in October. Now, these are things that we have to fight against. So it seems to me we have to bring these questions together and try and make the links, with wider imperialism. And Stop the War, we work very, very closely with CND and with other colleagues we're working with around the Palestine question, and we're going to continue to do that because we think a voice for peace, a voice against imperialism is so important at the moment. And there's just one final point, if I can make, Kate.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've found the discussion in the last few days shameful at every level from our politicians, who are blaming protesters for daring to protest about genocide in Gaza and claiming that we are making them unsafe. Nobody is making them unsafe. They are justifying Israel's policies, and it is that which people are objecting to very, very strongly. But also that we've seen in the last couple of days a massive Islamophobic attack. Suddenly the marches on Palestine have become Islamist marches. Suddenly Sadiq Khan is supposed to be is being run by the Muslims. We even have Suella Braverman saying that Muslims are running the country, which will probably come as a surprise to not just to every Muslim in this country, but also probably to Rishi Sunak. So these are vile, horrible Islamophobic slurs. And I think when we started Stop the War 22 years ago now, we said that there would be not just increase in wars, but there would be a rise in Islamophobia and attacks on our civil liberties. We're seeing those on a very, very big scale now, and they are two issues that we have to fight against, as well as fighting over the issue of war. So thanks very much, and I look forward to hearing the other speakers.
Thanks very much indeed, Lindsey. It's a lot of food for thought there. And we'll come back to that in the discussion. We're just waiting for Yurii Sheliazhenko to join us. He's just messaged to say he's just on the International Peace Bureau meeting, and he'll be joining us as soon as he can, and one or two other speakers in a similar situation. So I'm going to turn next to Tom Unterrainer, who is chair of CND. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Lindsey, for that very thought-provoking first contribution. And thanks to everybody here who's tuned in to listen to what I hope will be I hope my presentation will be interesting, but an interesting series of presentations, what I hope will be a useful discussion. Because as Lindsey outlined, we are in a very dangerous situation globally. It's my belief and my understanding that many of the drivers of the dangers that we face on a whole number of fronts come from the fact that the United States, as a military power, as an imperial power, as a nuclear armed power with alliances and agreements, including NATO, spanning across the world, has not fully recognized the tectonic shifts that have taken place over the past 2 decades or more, and its willingness to continue to take risky action, to escalate events, to light fires, to light sparks, to intervene in an attempt to reassert itself on a global scale, leaves the world in a very dangerous situation. And you can see some of the dangers and some of what that means in the lives lost, the bloodshed, the destruction, and the damage. You can see some signals of those in the events in Gaza at the moment, but also in Ukraine. Now, the campaign for nuclear disarmament has been clear from the start. We've been clear for the last 2 years that this war in Ukraine must end. We've also been clear from the word go that we stand with all those who oppose this and other wars, be they in the UK, across the world, and we stand with those in Russia and Ukraine who have taken to the streets and made a stand against this senseless slaughter. One of Bruce Kent's last public acts on behalf of CND was to deliver a letter to the Russian embassy demanding the release of peace protesters, demanding an end to nuclear threats, and demanding an end to the war. Part of the letter reads, "The movement for peace and against war is a global movement. From London and Washington to St. Petersburg and Moscow, those who oppose war and strive for peace take to the streets to make their voices heard. The campaign for nuclear disarmament stands squarely with all those in Russia and beyond who have protested against the invasion of Ukraine over the past days. We defend their rights to do so, and we insist that such a right is expected and is respected. And as Lindsey has indicated, we need to make that message very, very clear, not just to the Russian government, but to our own government, who are putting in place not just the rhetoric, not just the threats, not just the reports from government advisors, but we've seen a level of political policing in this country, particularly around the Palestine demonstrations, which is not just unacceptable, but gives us a signal of quite how serious the situation is. And so CND demands the release of political prisoners, including our friend Boris Kagalitsky, who's been imprisoned once again. He must be released. And I encourage you to look at the CND website to look at the statements that are up there. But the same is true for all political prisoners, whether they're in a prison in Moscow or whether they're in Belmarsh. And that's why we should also be clear that Julian Assange is a political prisoner and, in my view, should be released immediately. So this war must end. It must end because the grinding misery of death and destruction cannot be allowed to continue. It must end because the people of Ukraine have suffered much, much, much more than enough. It should end. It must end because we must make every effort to reduce nuclear tensions, and it must end before things escalate even further. For the last 2 years, the board of experts at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists have set the hands of their doomsday clock to 90 seconds to midnight. Midnight is a metaphor for the complete destruction of humanity. This 90 seconds, this is the closest to midnight that the clock has ever been set. Now, the atomic scientists make their determination. This isn't a bunch of radicals or activists or, street protesters, although some of them may have been on protests from time to time. This is a board of experts across a variety of fields, and they make their determination based on a detailed survey of all of the risks we face. These include the climate catastrophe, pandemics, emerging technologies, and centrally, the risk of nuclear war. In their most recent statement, they warn that the war in Ukraine and the widespread and growing reliance on nuclear weapons increase the risk of nuclear escalation. Now, the early weeks of Russia's invasion saw repeated threats of nuclear use and signs of increased readiness for nuclear use. Putin's comments explicitly shattered what is called the nuclear taboo, this idea that the leaders of nuclear states should never directly threaten to use such weapons. Now, the fact that the United States presidents, a number of them, and US officials, and British prime ministers and British officials have repeatedly made similar threats in the past seems to have been forgotten by some in this whole narrative, as have Jake Sullivan's admissions that the US had made such threats directly to the Kremlin. But nevertheless, Putin's comments were dangerous, and combined with the facts of a nuclear-armed US and NATO intervention, Putin's threats raised widespread alarm, and rightly so. I'll just speak a bit more loudly because there's a message in the chat saying I couldn't be heard, so I'll use my louder and deeper voice. Since these initial threats, Putin seems to have put a lid on them, with former Russian Prime Minister and similar, now the only such people, repeating these threats. But why might Putin have made these threats in the first place, and why might they have stopped? Without doubt, Putin invoked nuclear threats for the same reason that Western leaders invoke them. We're supposed to believe that nuclear weapons function silently as some magical deterrent system. But the myth of deterrence was only cooked up as a public relations excuse for nuclear weapons possession. If you examine the historical record, then you'll find any number of occasions when US presidents have used nuclear weapons, not in the sense of detonation, but as a means to achieve other ends. For example, in 2002, George W. Bush threatened a nuclear strike on Iraq if Iraq used its non-existent, and they knew it at the time, non-existent weapons of mass destruction. By March 2022, just a month after the initial invasion, Russia occupied just over 25% of Ukraine. By April, this figure had fallen to 20%, following a number of disastrous, for Russia at least, military blunders. The amount of occupied territory held at around this level for a few more months, then dropped to a figure of between 15 and 17% by November of 2022. This is not how Putin expected the war to proceed, hence the threats. What happened next is that billions upon billions of pounds and dollars of military equipment poured into Ukraine from the US and NATO allies. Russia may have been able to adjust some of its previous military mistakes, but the drones, missiles, tanks, and other armaments deployed by Ukraine have resulted in an effective stalemate. All those billions into an effective stalemate. From November 2022 to January 2024, when I have the most recent figures, there has been approximately zero shift in the amount of territory occupied by Russia, and zero shift, approximately, in the total amount of territory controlled by Ukraine. All the billions of armaments, all that technology, all that destruction, all those deaths, all that grinding slaughter have not shifted things. So the question is this: if either Russia or Ukraine, for that matter, imagines it can win a war, what will it take to win? Even more weaponry? Even more deadly weaponry? How many dead Ukrainians? How many slaughtered on the battlefield? How much more destruction? A massive and unprecedented escalation would be needed. But why? Isn't Russia on the brink of economic and social collapse after massive sanctions campaigns against it? Will that not sort the mess out? No, just look at the Russian economy. Yes, some Western foodstuffs and products are not available. Yes, inflation is high, but Russian trade and Russian imports and exports have not ground to a halt. The Russian economy is doing better than the IMF predicted, it was announced today. Sanctions do not work. Sanctions like the ones imposed on Russia do not work. Those who impose them know it. Scholars who study sanctions know it. We know it. What options does that leave? What options? The spectre of continued and increased nuclear tensions, threats of nuclear use, and all of those contribute to the potential risk of nuclear use. Now, much has been made of the decision to deploy Russian nuclear missiles to Belarus. Quite right too, C&D's warned against such a dangerous and potentially deadly proliferation of nuclear weapons. We've condemned it. But we've also been campaigning and warning against the expansion of the US and NATO nuclear footprint across Europe. This expansion includes plans to station US nuclear bombs at Lakenheath once more, and the planned deployment of new F-35 nuclear-capable jets and new US bombs at sites across Europe. Nuclear developments in Belarus and across Europe are similar in that both plans for both predate the war in Ukraine. Belarus concluded a constitutional referendum removing its nuclear-free status 2 days before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And they claim that the reason that they instigated a referendum in the first place was in response to repeated calls over the years by Polish politicians, not just members of parliament, but leading Polish politicians, from the prime minister to the foreign and defense secretaries, calling for the US to station its nuclear weapons in Poland, extending its nuclear blueprint even further to a state which borders Belarus and Ukraine. Plans for Lakenheath, new nuclear-capable jets, and new bombs have been in development for many, many years, not just over the past 2 years, but many, many years. What is new about this situation is the intensity of these nuclear developments, including repeated calls, as I've mentioned, to station US nuclear weapons in Poland, and the latest, frankly, idiotic and dangerous calls for a Eurobomb by some warmongering German politicians, including members of the current German government. Add to the mix the fact that trillions of dollars are to be spent on not just upgrading, but completely renewing US nuclear weapon systems. Every nuclear arms state is upgraded. A new nuclear arms race is in full swing. Europe is remilitarizing. European states are spending positively Trumpian amounts of money on rearming. We'll remember during the Trump presidency where he was dismissed for calling for such extreme levels of spending, but they're spending it now. They are spending it now. In the middle of this, we have a war that could, for all the reasons outlined, and for many others, escalate dramatically. This war, the war in Ukraine, must end. And the only way to do it, is through diplomacy and negotiation. But I'm afraid this cannot be left to the US, the UK, most European states, and indeed all of the NATO member states. In fact, they should have nothing to do with such efforts. They need to stand aside. Why? Because a nuclear-armed alliance with NATO's record, including its record of expansion after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, has zero credibility. What's more, just take a look at the UK over the past week. Lindsey mentioned some of what happened. The UK is currently propping up and arming a genocide on the Palestinian people. Look at the disgraceful scenes in Parliament earlier this week. These people have zero credibility. Those scenes will have been seen across the world. People know what it means. On the one hand, they're talking about democracy and rules and fairness and the liberal order and so on and so forth. But you have scenes like that in Parliament. You have the fact that they're arming a genocidal regime. You have a fact that hundreds and tens of millions are being spent on nuclear weapon systems. And in the case of Britain, 500 million spent on a renewal that's resulted in a missile that can't even launch. Thank goodness, I would say. These people are just unsuited and they're incapable of convening and producing successful diplomacy and negotiations. In fact, they're complicit in all of the bad things, in all of the dangers, in all of the tensions that are developing. We know it, the non-nuclear world knows it, and the global majority knows it. But the non-Western global majority is not a bystander. Brazil has proposed negotiations. The BRICS countries have proposed similar. Countries from Latin America, across Africa, and into Asia know that the very worst must be averted. They know that diplomacy and negotiation can end this war and remove the threats of nuclear escalation. They know that peace and security cannot be enforced at the expense of someone else. They understand the importance of a common security approach, and we should give them our support, every support, in their efforts, at the same time as continuing our campaigns against the very worst that our own government and those with whom they're in alliances with, all the very worst that those people produce. So I'll conclude by agreeing with Lindsey. We need a sustained and expanded peace and anti-war campaigning on every level, because the situation is dangerous. No political party, in my view, in this country is going to ride in and save us. It is down to us, and we know that political organising, political protest, and mass demonstrations can make a difference. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Tom. Right, now we're going to try a bit of a technological fix-up here, because I've got Medea Benjamin here on my phone, on WhatsApp. She's in the Caribbean at the moment, so her Zoom isn't working. So we're going to see if we can hear her, if you can hear her over my phone. So Medea, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, I'm just okay, right. So that's good. So I'm going to introduce you. So many of you will know Medea Benjamin. She's a really outstanding and leading United States anti-war and peace campaigner. She's co-founder of Code Pink. So Medea, over to you.
Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry I can't be with you on the Zoom. I'm in Cuba, and the 6-decade-long U.S. Sanctions on Cuba mean that you can't do things like get on the Zoom. I'm glad that I'm following Lindsey and Tom, where they establish the threat of nuclear war, the importance of building this anti-war movement. I want to talk from the U.S. point of view, where this war is quite removed from us here in the U.S., and yet the Ukraine is so dependent on the United States to be able to continue to wage this war. We just had the head of the Democratic Party in the Senate, Senator Schumer, who was in Ukraine 2 days ago, and came back saying that if the U.S. doesn't keep supporting this war, Ukraine will lose. On the other hand, he said, if the U.S. supports this war, Ukraine will win, which we know is ridiculous because there is no winning on the battlefield. In any case, the U.S. is sending a massive amount of weapons, ammunition, tanks, rockets, missiles, aircraft, drones, radar, communication systems, satellite services. Without these, Ukraine would not be able to continue this war. But it is not just economic. It's not just military. And let me say these are the U.S. companies are benefiting handsomely from this war. And that's one of the reasons that it continues. But it's also the U.S. support for the ongoing budget for the Ukrainian government. I think we are providing about $2 billion every month to literally keep the lights on. The economic deficit in Ukraine is predicted to get even worse, to be in 2024 $43 billion. That's a quarter of the entire GDP of Ukraine. And it is the US and the West that are going to have to cover that. Of course, with this tremendous influence, this tremendous dependency, comes influence, and that yet the United States pretends that it cannot do anything about moving towards peace talks if Ukraine does not want to do that. But in reality, what we see is how the US and the UK have actually stymied peace talks, sabotaged peace talks, stopped the peace talks that were going on 1 month after the invasion, that were positive and coming up with a peace plan, but have stymied that throughout these last 2 years. Because as the US Secretary of Defense said very clearly that they wanted to use this war to weaken Russia. And let's not forget that the Secretary of Defense from the United States came to us directly from the board of Raytheon. The influence of these weapons manufacturers is so ingrained in the US system that it has to be taken into account when you ask why the US continues to support this war. But the important thing to recognize, as the other speakers have said, is it's not working. Ukraine is not winning on the battlefield, despite the $100 billion that the US has put into this war, and that the idea that the sanctions on Russia could bleed Russia dry has just not happened, with the Russian economy being surprisingly resilient. In fact, in the tragic death of Navalny, the US has just announced 500 new sanctions, which Putin has scoffed at because they know that this will not have a significant impact on the Russian economy. Because of the stalemate on the battlefield, there has been waning public support in the United States, with opinion polls showing a growing desire for a ceasefire. This, unfortunately, is not reflected in the power centers of the White House and Congress. The Democratic Party is following the line of the Biden administration, and the one example we had of progressive Democrats trying to come forward and say maybe it's time for peace talks was over a year ago, and they were so pilloried by their own Democratic Party that they withdrew that letter and have been quiet ever since. In fact, there is not one Democrat that I know of who has come out publicly and said they don't want to keep supporting financially this war in Ukraine. Trump is the politician who has come out and said that. He says that he would solve this problem by calling up his two good friends, Navalny, Zelensky, and Biden, and they would solve this war. This is very popular among Trump supporters, as well as many people in the general public. But it has put pressure on Republicans to not want to agree with Biden's new request for another $60 billion for Ukraine. And so that is the right wing of the Republican Party. Because of that, the Biden administration has put forward a package that includes not only $60 billion for Ukraine, but try to sweeten the pot for the Republicans by putting in $14 billion for Israel in the midst of its genocide, putting in billions of dollars for Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific to antagonize China, which is something that the Republicans want to do, and money to militarize the U.S. border, because there are many Republicans and others who say, why should we care about the border of Ukraine when we can't even control our own border? This idea of the Biden administration that they could throw all of these different pieces into one piece of legislation, which they called One and Done, $118 billion, has actually become a debacle in Congress because of the partisan politics. And it's been a ping pong ball going back from the Senate to the House, to the Senate to the House, where they keep changing it slightly. I think in the end, this money to Ukraine will unfortunately get through. But there are many, many, many people asking, how long will the U.S. keep throwing this money in? If $100 billion didn't give Ukraine the advantage it needed to win this war, what will another $60 billion do? And how long will the American people be asked to fund this? Of course, we on this call all know that the only solution to this war is through diplomacy. And yet, the politicians in the United States keep saying that it is impossible to talk to Russia. We just heard recently, though, Tucker Carlson do a long interview with Vladimir Putin, in which he said he was ready for negotiations. And there was a Reuters piece that came out very recently that said Russia, through intermediaries, was trying to talk to the United States as early as January of this year. And so our job as the anti-war movement is to push for diplomacy. It has been hard to build up an anti-war movement around Ukraine in the United States. The legacy of the Cold War continues. The legacy of Russiagate, in which the Democrats said that it was Russia interference in our elections that led to the election of Trump over Hillary Clinton. And the U.S. media has been horrific in reporting on the context for this war, as if it all began on February 24th when Russia invaded, with no mentions about the long-standing issues of NATO expansion and U.S. direct interference in the internal affairs of Ukraine. And so we are left now, ironically, with the energy that is coming from the anti-war movement around Israel is now injected some energy into the movement to try to stop the continued fueling of the war in Ukraine. Since the Biden administration has put this all in one package, it has given us the ability in the last several months, when this package is being constantly changed and discussed, to be in the halls of Congress and to be interrupting our congresspeople in their home districts, in their town halls, wherever they are, to say no to this supplemental, to say that we want a ceasefire in Gaza, and we need a ceasefire in Ukraine. And we look forward to working with you in the UK and across Europe as we build up this anti-war movement and push our governments to stop fueling wars and to start talking. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Medea. I don't know if you're able to hold on there in case we need to come back to you on the questions section, but if you can.
Sure, I'd be delighted to stay. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So just there's a question in the chat about Lakenheath and what's going on at Lakenheath. So I can just inform you quite timely that on Monday, the 26th of February, that's just a couple of days' time, C&D is actually hosting a webinar entitled Lakenheath, Its Role in the US War Machine. And one of our guests there is Hans Christensen from the Federation of American Scientists. And he's the person he's a top expert, and he's the person who's revealed the information about the developments taking place at Lakenheath Air Base. And he's got that information from US Department of Defense documents. So it's a very authoritative it's authoritative information. So do join that. Maybe I can ask my colleagues to put the link to that webinar in the chat if anyone wants to sign up for that. The less good news is that we're still waiting for other speakers. So one we know is on a train, and the other one we know is on another meeting and is supposed to be joining us shortly, but it's going to be a bit of trouble going on after this meeting. So anyway, I do apologise for that. Maybe we could take a first round of questions if anyone would like to raise their hands. Yes, the Lake and Heath info has just gone in the chat. Okay, well, I'm going to promote some other things. Before I take Thomas, I'm going to promote a couple of other things, and Carol as well. Just to remind you, I'm sure everyone is active in the campaigning for ceasefire in Gaza. So there is the next national demonstration is coming up on March the 9th. That will be taking place in London, and on March the 8th, there will be another workplace day of action with a focus on support for Palestinian women, because of course that's around the time of International Women's Day. So please do put both of those dates in your diary. So I'm going to take 2 questions. Please do try and make them into questions. And then we'll come back to any panel member that wants to say anything. And then we hope to be getting our other speakers. So Thomas, would you like to go first, please?
Sure, thank you. So I feel really frustrated about the situation, like everyone. I run Philosophers for Peace, which I set up back in the 80s during the Green and Common era. And I've been to Moscow. I was elected coordinator of Philosophers for Peace in Moscow. I have many Russian intellectual friends. I think that the talk so far has neglected the role of Putin himself in this, and particularly the ideology of Putin. If you read Tim Snyder's study, The Road to Unfreedom, about the influence of Russian neo-fascism and racism on Putin, I think we are looking at actually a demented leader who launched this attack on Ukraine. I know that some apologists say, yeah, no, it was all NATO, etc., etc. I don't buy that. I'm simply speaking as a philosopher and an expert in Russian intellectual life. I think what Putin has done is catastrophic to the Russian people, and we shouldn't be letting him off the hook. We should hold him to account. Now, of course, the military types do that with war. We should be doing it through arguments, through analysis, through, truth, rather than propaganda. And so my question to all the panel is, what do you think of Putin's action in launching this war 2 years ago? And how can it be undone in his mind? How can we help him to withdraw? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Thomas. And I'll take another couple of questions, and then I'll come to the speakers to do their answers to that. Ricky Knight, I see you next. If you'd like to say your question.
Hello, yes. A question for you, Kate, and maybe for Tom. It is very much last century, but back in the 80s, before the so-called end of history, CND had established quite a good contacts with the grassroots activists like Families and Mothers for Peace in Russia. And I wonder to what extent CND is working on not so much high-profile dissidents, but also grassroots organizations. Yeah.
Thanks very much indeed. Tom, do you want to make a note of that? I'll try and make a note as well. Carol, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. I've been watching the TV this morning commemorating the second anniversary of the Ukraine war. And one of the things that's very striking, in order to justify the position of the US and UK and European Union and so on, of promoting war, they are already rewriting the history of it. It seems to me that if you step back from the sort of propaganda that we're seeing on our mainstream media,
it seems to me pretty evident that Ukraine is losing the war, and the United States and NATO allies are reluctant to stop pressing Ukraine to continue, and equally reluctant, for obvious reasons, and I'm sure on this call we're all glad of it, equally reluctant to put their own troops in. It therefore seems to me there is no prospect of any military success. And I just wonder if our speakers so far would agree with that. Kate, before I go off, can I abuse the fact that I have the mic and point out that very long discussions in the chat not only blank out the screen, we can't see the speakers when they speak, but they're very distracting. I'm not saying they aren't important topics, but most of us have joined to listen to the speakers. Is it possible to turn the chat off while the speakers are speaking? Thanks.
I'm not a technical genius, but I think if we turned it off, then we'd lose it all. I mean, you should be able to have a function at the bottom of your screen where you can just not display the chat for yourself. That's what I think. But anyway, have a little play around there. John, over to you.
Yes, there's been a lot of discussion here about one of the two most crucial questions in Ukraine, which is the question of NATO. But there is a second one, which unless I missed it, the speakers didn't address, which is the question of the Russian-speaking minority within Ukraine, which is almost 30% of the population, and which was deprived of its linguistic rights and other rights, that is to use the Ukrainian language in court, legal things, school, etc. This was condemned even by organizations associated with the European Union. And the question is, there is only two possibilities for the situation. One is the restoration of those rights, and the other is the splitting of Ukraine, or their suppression, which is what in fact would have happened if there was a unequivocal call for the withdrawal of the Russian troops. So what I would like to ask all the speakers about is therefore what is their positions on the rights of the Russian-speaking national minority within the Ukraine, because that is the second big question, which I don't think any of the speakers addressed. Thanks.
Thanks very much, John. Other people with hands up, sorry, I'm going to just delay calling you because Yurii Sheliazhenko has now joined. Yurii, I can't see you, but I can see you in the list. Are you there? Yep. Yurii, he's there. Just asking him to unmute. I'm asking him to unmute. Okay. While we're just resolving that, okay, so Russell, are you there, or should I go to Murdo? Murdo, do you want to quickly come in while we're just sorting out Yurii there?
The situation, firstly, I disagree with the comments by Mr. Dufferin on Putin. Putin is someone who draws his intellectual resources from multiple directions. And in many ways, he operates more as a centrist politician, but a centrist in a very non-European, non-North American sense. And in that sense, it's a very much more complicated issue than simply a demented individual. But the important point that I wish to come to, and I would hope that some of the speakers would actually give some thought to this matter. There's an awful lot of people seeing either a defeat for Ukraine or a victory for Ukraine or whatever. But I have my doubts that we can and should be looking at this as a war where there will be an eventual quick resolution. In fact, I doubt there will be any resolution in the long term. And that what we may have to be looking at instead is a very, very long war with lots of eruptions of violence and lots of passivity, because there are the issues certainly of the minorities, not just in Ukraine, but all across Eastern Europe, attitudes to all sorts of where the borders and the boundaries actually lie. All these issues are in many ways still to be resolved across Eastern Europe. So a lot of these sorts of eruptions are likely to occur. And I think this is why we have to look much, much more at the institutional structures that we are locked into, especially that of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and Atlanticism, and the way in which the European Union itself has become a much, much more militarized organization through permanent structured cooperation, European peace facilities, and things like that, because these things will keep feeding conflict in. And it may not even be Ukraine that will be the front for it. We may see eruptions across other areas of the borders. And I think this is one of the areas that we need to seriously think about, because a long-term war lasting decades strikes me as a grave, dangerous threat at the moment.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Oh, hang on. Yurii was there, now he's just rejoining. So I'm just going to just give me a moment. Make sure he's back in.
Yes, hi.
Hi, Yurii. Oh, phew. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So don't worry about that. So it's a great pleasure, friends, now to welcome Yurii Sheliazhenko from the Ukrainian pacifist organization. Yurii, the floor is yours.
Dear friends, greetings from Kiev, and thank you for holding anti-war rally on this sad occasion of second anniversary of Putin's criminal assault against Ukraine. It is a rare event today where people gather to discuss how to stop the war, not how to destroy the enemy. Culture of peace, which inspires this thinking, unites all. Unites all people in the world, and lack of culture of peace is what caused this war. If only Ukraine could have our own Nelson Mandela, able to call for decolonization from Russian imperial influence without discrimination of Russian minority or Russian culture. If only Putin could be wise enough to not weaponize Russian culture in greedy pursuit of great power in the so-called Russian world, instead of invading Ukraine, to go to International Court of Justice and have a civilized arbitration. But here we are. There is brutal Russian invasion which destroys our cities and kills people. There was air raids, of course, even today, and we must resist non-violently. Both darkness of Putin's invasion and darkness of militarism at home awaken out of worst instincts because of Russian aggression. Militarist playbook is on the table everywhere today, because nationalism, militarism, and great power ambitions to control their spheres of influence became normal in international affairs. But when whole world prepares for war, pacifists prepare for peace, as we always do. Don't ask us how to defeat the enemy. Ask yourself, are you prepared to work for better future without enemies, where the worst enemy, even the word enemy, will be forgotten? I hope it will happen. It is indeed clear that the war is planned and budgeted for many years. People are told that the fight for survival will require sacrifices and being prepared for the worst scenarios. But people also have a right to peace, and people have a right to move towards peace, breaking the ice of fears, lies, and hatred. Peace movement is a part of human nature. It is indispensable, incorruptible, and omnipresent. It starts from listening to the voice of conscience in every sane mind. As almost all men in Ukraine, I am prohibited from going abroad, and added to this, I am facing political repressions for advocacy of peace and hope for non-violent future for whole our common planet, including my country and yours. I declared to advocate conscientious objection to military service, I worked to help objectors to defend themselves when they charged in draft evasion. Later, I learned that all petitions about opening borders for refugees of war, about the right to refuse to kill, about the ceasefire and peace talks were forwarded from offices of the President and Human Rights Commissioner to the Security Service of Ukraine. They came to my home, broke door, found nothing criminal, but seized my computer and smartphone trying to shut down activities of the Ukrainian peace movement. They're going to accuse a pacifist in justification of war in anti-war statement, to charge me in the so-called justification of Russian aggression, which is punishable by prison up to 5 years with confiscation of property. It is Kafkaesque. These allegations are based on a so-called forensic linguistic research, far from linguistic science, and more resembling ideologically motivated witch hunt, full of hate to pacifism, using words such as demagoguery and defeatism. Two independent licensed forensic linguists experts wrote conclusions that I didn't justify aggression, but it seems that Security Service of Ukraine intends to repress me anyway for my peace work, punish me for a dream about world without wars. This dream means a hope for prisoners of conscience, like Vitaly Alexeyenko, Dmytro Zelinsky, and those who received suspended sentences, like Mikhail Yavorsky, and those who asked discharge from military service on the grounds of conscience, like Andriy Vishnevetsky. There is pressure on Grand Chamber of Supreme Court in Ukraine. Vishnevetsky asks for discharge from military service on ground of conscience. President didn't allow that. Army didn't allow that. Probably it is army pressured president not perform functions of guarantor of human rights, and this lawsuit for president as commander-in-chief to allow conscientious objectors to be discharged from army, and Grand Chamber of Supreme Court in Ukraine should decide this case. But because of pressure, the presiding judge recused herself, and now it is uncertain what will be decision. And it will be decision in secrecy. There will be no public. Anyway, I tried a lot to have a hope for people who listen to voice of their conscience, and this is my so-called crime. But despite all the hate and repressions, I am determined to remind the militarists that censoring pro-peace speech is not defense of democracy, but authoritarian tendency, that abducting people on the streets, ignoring their objections, not only based on conscience, but even based on health, and treating them inhumanely in military training camps, like they did in recent scandalous case of Sergei Grishin, conscripted despite serious illness and denied of proper medical examination, who was forced to declare hunger strike, and now he is in coma because of violent attempts to make him a soldier. And his famous photo is with Pacific on a t-shirt. So it is not only illness of body, but it is healthness of mind. So this is just wrong. And recent bill aimed at totally military registration under threat of civil death, without exceptions to objectors, with political purpose to force Ukrainians abroad to return and fight, or else they will be deprived of property and consular services. It is also not a democratic move. But I think we should dare to imagine better, truly democratic world without armies and borders, the world governed without violence, where all conflicts are resolved by friendly dialogue for mutual benefit and common good, the world where everybody refuses to kill and thus there are no wars, the world ruled by the great powers of truth and love. We must awake these great powers of truth and love to resist Russian aggression. And peace is rising, peace is escalating. Not only Russian, but every aggression, every war. See the protests against genocide in Gaza. I also delivered an anti-war message to Israel embassy in Kiev. Comply with decision of ICJ. Comply with recommendations to ensure right to conscientious objection to soldiers in Israel, to Meservot. Democratic governments should listen to the people. They must insist on proper legal recognition of human right to conscientious objection to military service in Ukraine and in any country which pretends to be democratic. Democratic governments must also provide asylum and protection for all those who can't return home because of credible threat of repressions for advocacy of peace and the right to refuse to kill. And this threat is obviously credible in Russia, in Belarus, under persecutions for any dissent, where the Navalny is killed, where the anti-war candidate Nadezhdin was censored from ballot to again re-elect Putin. And sadly, these repressions for advocacy of peace and right to refuse to kill, we observe even in Ukraine. Since governments are reluctant to comply with their human rights obligations, the Object War campaign was launched, and it needs support of civil society. I urge you to give this support. To conclude, sorry for I'm being late. I am just from meeting of Ukrainian pacifist movement, where after heated debates, we adopted the statement, with reading of which I want to conclude. It is about participation of unarmed pacifist forces in implementation of the Ukrainian peace formula. Ukrainian pacifist movement, bearing in mind the formula that peace is not equal to war, supports and will implement in our activities the values of peace, democracy, and justice declared in the Ukrainian peace formula of President Zelensky. We agree with condemnation of Russian aggression, demands of withdrawal of troops, and compensations of damages. Nobody could feel safe while the war is considered normal and dictates its rules of lawlessness. We will act on the basis of belief that democratic society and democratic world must be united for common good and common security. We will resist nonviolently to Russian aggression and all forms of militarism and war. We will support preservation and development of democracy. We will protect human rights and rule of law. Pacifism is a vital part of diversity of thoughts and beliefs in democratic society. We will preserve pacifist identity, which gives hope for a better future without wars, and we will uphold our right to refuse to kill.
Thank you very much indeed, Yurii, and thanks so much for managing to join our webinar. It's brilliant to hear your voice directly from Ukraine. Thank you so much, and I know we're all in solidarity with you. Right, so I'm going to own up that we just can't get hold of our other speakers. One of them, who you may know, is on a train, annoyingly, so there you go. But that means I'm going to turn to two people who have just revealed themselves really to be the most fantastic, reliable stalwarts of our movement, notably Tom and Lindsey. So it falls to you both to answer all the questions. Thanks everyone for that great discussion and really interesting questions. So I think we've just got time to hear from both of you. If Medea manages to get back on Zoom, I'll take her too, but at the moment she's not there. So Tom, over to you to make your concluding remarks, please.
Thank you, Kate. Well, look, even in a world of new technologies like Zoom that we've come to rely upon, people who do peace work and anti-war work and political work have huge amounts of demands on their time, and I'm sure that's the reason why our other speakers haven't been able to make it. I'll attempt to answer a few, or respond, if not answer, to a few of the points raised. But I'm not going to speculate on the state of mind of Putin or what his influences are. I just don't know enough. In terms of working with the Russian anti-war and peace movement, people will remember that in the opening days of Russia's invasion, there were a proliferation of statements, manifestos, commitments, and there were protests across Russia. There were protests across Russia, and some of us were able to interact with many of the individuals and groups on the Telegram service, which is widely used in Russia. But in the same way that the imprisonment of Boris Kagarlitsky for a second time now demonstrates quite how difficult the situation is in Russia for people who think and work like us. It has been difficult to establish ongoing and maintain ongoing relationships. There are some people who are integrated, like Yurii is in Ukraine, into the International Peace Bureau, and there's ongoing communication and work with certain individuals. But for instance, just today, I don't know what these people's politics is, but I think there were 300 mothers and wives and partners of serving Russian soldiers who laid flowers at the tomb of the unknown soldier. I think it was in Moscow. It may have been in St. Petersburg. My memory fails me at the moment. They were summarily arrested. So it is difficult. It is difficult to sustain public anti-war and peace work. But I think it will be important, and it obviously is important to make and establish any links that we can. Just responding to Carol, I characterise what was going on, or the current situation or state in Ukraine at the moment, as one of stalemate, and I base that solely on the percentages of territory controlled by any one side. Now, of course, it's not the same 15 to 18 or 17% all the time. There are shifts and there are changes, but it is clear just from the balance of what is going on, just from the reality of Russia's ability not only to maintain its economy, but to maintain some sense of stability and to correct its previous military mistakes and errors, that this war is not balanced in the favor of Ukraine. Crude arithmetic explains as much. And it seems that the United States and others do not, have not got their calculator handy in this respect. As Carol rightly said, there's a reluctance to directly intervene, that is with NATO troops. And I think that's a wise choice on their part. But there is also a reluctance to allow negotiations and to allow diplomacy. And so the question for Rishi Sunak, the question for Joe Biden, it seems to me, is, are you willing to let every single Ukrainian in a uniform, either now or in the future, to die? Is that the point at which you will advocate for diplomacy and negotiation? Because all of your weapons, all of your sophisticated technologies, all of the drones, all of the missiles, all of the tanks have not got anywhere close to achieving your stated aims. And if you think you can continue to promote and insist upon some sort of military victory, what does that include? What does that not include? And this is the concern about escalation, because it's not just the words, it's not just the rhetoric, it's not just the obvious tensions, it's the direction of travel in which escalation could point that is deeply, deeply concerning. And as I warned, it could include countenancing the possible use of nuclear weapons, either by design or by mistake. We've had threats from all sides. The record is there. Where will this end? So it's a dangerous, very, very dangerous situation. In response to John, I can't respond to that as the chair of C&D directly, but I can give my own personal view. But before I do that, I'll just make clear that it is a matter of record, for instance, from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, who had a monitoring mission in Ukraine to the east on the border of the Donbass region prior to Russia's invasion. A month or so before Russia's invasion, Canada and the United Kingdom, which participated in this observation mission, withdrew, but the mission continued, and they continued to produce very detailed and specific reports of instances of violence, of violations of rights, in terms of the Russian-speaking minority and those who are in areas not under direct Ukrainian control in the east. And the very last report that the OSCE observation mission made public, it's still available, where it was last time I checked, on the OSCE website in the reports section, showed an enormous barrage of shelling, attacks on civilian populations on the eastern side of the line of control, that is going from the Ukrainian side into the Russian-speaking majority side. So certainly the Russian minority, the speaking minority, the 30% or so that were there, have the right not to be attacked and bombed in that way again. And speaking personally, of course, you know, all minorities have the right to have their rights respected. And, you know, if we're to be consistent in our political outlook and what we say, then we defend all of these rights. And I think in the case of Ukraine, that should be clear to the majority of us. And just to conclude, you know, one of the reasons why the current situation is so desperately dangerous, I want to return to the point that I sort of opened with, you know, the global situation, the global balance of power is not how the United States wants it to be. From Iraq to Afghanistan and elsewhere, you know, the military and imperial projects of the United States have been defeated. This is a wounded empire. This is a wounded empire with an unstable political situation. You just need to look at the current government and the fact that we're in an election year. And all of these things together make for a very, very dangerous and potentially deadly coming together of circumstances. So we must be on the alert, and that means we must build our movement, and we must be clear. We must be clear in all of this, and CND certainly is, that the risk of nuclear use is more likely than it has ever been since the opening of the atomic age. With respect to Ukraine, it's been one of the main drivers for those risks. So on top of the imperative to stop the slaughter and destruction, it is imperative that these nuclear tensions are eased. It is imperative that diplomacy and negotiation find their place again. And it is imperative, as I said in concluding earlier, that this is a global concern, and therefore those with the most credibility to do these negotiations and to launch them should be allowed to do so without the interference, disruption, or blocking tactics of the United States, UK, or its allies in the nuclear-armed NATO alliance. And I'll stop there.
Thanks very much indeed, Tom. And then Lindsey, over to you, and then we'll conclude our event. Welcome, Lindsey.
Thanks very much, Kate, and thanks to everybody who's contributed and all the speakers, and solidarity to Yurii and all the comrades in Ukraine who are campaigning so hard and so bravely over this issue, and particularly to link your struggles to the situation in Gaza when you're already suffering as a result of war in so many ways. So it's very, very good to hear from everybody, and from Medea, of course, who we see regularly on television, disrupting the lives of another war criminal in Washington or somewhere else. Just to respond, I mean, Tom's made a lot of the points I would have made. I mean, the first one to say is, I mean, I think, you know, I don't think we can explain Putin's action, or indeed the action of any of these leaders just simply by personal failings, dementia or so on, whatever they may be. And, I don't think you can explain his. There's a number of people put in the chat, what about a whole list of people who are supporting genocide in Gaza or what have you. And I think we have to look at it very much from the political, economic situation that the world finds itself in. And I would say that that's very connected to the whole system of imperialism. As Tom has very, very rightly said, we have this situation where the US is by far the biggest military power in the world, still much, much bigger than any competitor. But of course, it is a declining power, and it's the declining economic power, political power worldwide, which leads it to rely more and more on military solutions, so-called, in order to achieve things. And so I think we have to put it in this kind of context and look at the reason why you're seeing this growing conflict around the world, and not just over Ukraine. Now, on Ukraine itself, I mean, I think the reasons for Putin's invasion are fairly clear. It was about trying to prevent NATO expansion. It was about trying to defend the eastern provinces, and it was about trying to maintain Ukrainian neutrality. I don't think it was justified. As I've said on many occasions, and Stop the War has said, we oppose the invasion by Russia. I don't think the way that you protect language or other minority rights, important though they are, and I very much support the right of people, obviously, to speak Russian within Ukraine. I don't think you protect them by invasion, but nonetheless, we have to look at it in that context, and we have to look at the reasons why it happened. And NATO expansion was absolutely central to that, which is why when you now hear people saying, "Oh, if we don't stop Putin by more and more weapons going in, then he'll invade wherever, the Baltic states or Poland, or come to that Britain," which seems to be a commoner view from some people. I mean, I think none of these are really don't really stand up in any serious way. There was a specific question here about Ukraine's neutrality, and that was what it was about. But I don't think it was justified to do it. We now have a situation where 2 years on, I agree with Carol. I don't think that there is a prospect of military victory for Ukraine. I think partly despite all the sanctions, that actually the Russian economy, it seems to me, is not doing as badly as was predicted at all. So the sanctions aren't having the impact that the West hoped that they would have. The West obviously does not want to get directly involved in a war, an open war with NATO, which is why there is a proxy war in Ukraine. And I think obviously we have to be grateful for that, but it is still a possibility that it can still escalate at a certain point. Other people have raised the question that this can be a war which goes on for a very, very long time, with neither side really breaking through, with a very high rate of attrition, in which actually kind of this kind of war can favor the Russians because they have a much bigger economy and population and so on, but nonetheless can go on for a very long time. And we know, for example, in Korea, there's still been no formal peace after practically all of my lifetime. And those sorts of things, you can see the difficulty and the great suffering that this will cause to the people in Ukraine, Russia, and elsewhere in the region. So I don't think there is any prospect of Ukrainian military success, but the politicians have a lot staked on claiming that they can help this. And it's not just about claiming that they can win for Ukraine, it's also about what they're doing to their own economies and to their own societies. And the militarization of countries like Germany, the growth in so-called defense spending is very, very rapid around the world. And in this country, it's doubled over the last, it's gone up by 10% over the last few years. And Boris Johnson has locked in even more of those. So I think these are major questions for us. Tom's talked a lot about the threat of nuclear war, and I very much agree with those kind of things. Just a couple of other points. That one, somebody has put in the chat about the the political setup in Ukraine, that it isn't a democracy, or that it's very corrupt and it has fascists and far right people, certainly very influential around the government. And I would add that the question of the war itself is creating more divisions, because a poll that I saw recently showed, I think 72% of Ukrainians thought it was preferable to try and get some kind of political settlement rather than to save lives, rather than letting the war continue. Now, and that's much bigger than it was 2 years ago. So I think there's also obviously huge discontent about conscription for obvious reasons, that more and more people are being put into the military against their will. So those are important questions for Ukrainians, but also for us to understand the contradictions. Then can I just finally link it with the question of Gaza, because we have this very odd situation in this country where there is a very small or relatively small level of support for the kind of position we've outlined over Ukraine, for a whole number of reasons, which I haven't got time to go into, but also because there's a huge sort of government consensus on this, and Putin is very much projected as, the evil dictator who can take over the world type of thing. But with Gaza, we have a very different situation. So we have a very big movement around Gaza. And I think the challenge for us is, how do we feed in the analysis we've heard today and the facts that we've heard today into that wider movement around Gaza, as well as holding our politicians to account? Gaza has become a huge political issue in this country. I don't want to repeat the things that everybody said earlier in respect of Parliament and respect of the ceasefire question and all this, but it's a huge political issue which is going to affect the general election. And we have to see that as a way of bringing in the arguments against the threat of nuclear war, against the growth in defence spending, as part of an overall package. So just to conclude there, thanks very much, Kate, and thanks everybody for coming. And please get involved with Stop the War and CND if you're not already, and let's keep mobilising and keep organising.
Thanks very much indeed, Lindsey, and thanks very much to the other speakers and to all of you for coming along and joining the discussion and so on. The recording of this will be sent out to everybody who registered for the meeting, so please do feel free to share it, and look forward to seeing you on future webinars, but also on future demonstrations, and hopefully many of you on March the 9th, the next national demonstration for Gaza. So thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.